Hello YouTube, it's James Reidner. It is September 22nd, 2020, and a while back on August the 4th I did a video called Possible Prophetic Dream, emphasis on that word possible. And in that video I mentioned at the end that I wasn't going to give my interpretation at that point until a later time because I didn't want to influence anyone's interpretations with my own. So in this video I'm going to provide my interpretation of that dream, and for whatever it's worth, and close the loop on that. Okay, so if you'll recall in that dream, at the end of the dream, a voice said to me, I heard a voice say, it starts in the Bahamas. So the beginning of the dream, I was in some type of a seagoing vessel. It could have been a battleship or some kind of naval ship, maybe a submarine, I don't know for sure, but it was clearly some type of a seagoing type vessel. Okay, so following the course of the dream, that would have to be in the Bahamas somewhere. Okay, so we'll establish that first. It transitions into a desert, which I interpret to be the Sahara Desert based on the way it looked and based on where we ended up. We ended up in Egypt. Okay, I understood that we were in Egypt when that part stopped. When the tower was going through the desert and it stopped in Egypt, it makes sense that it had been moving through the Sahara. Okay, so let's establish that first. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back to the beginning of the dream, back to the Bahamas. When I woke up that morning, the dream was so impactful to me that the first thing I did was I thought, well, what's the connection between the Bahamas and Egypt? Because it starts in the Bahamas, but the dream ended in Egypt. What's the connection? So the first thing I did was I looked at a map. Of course, the Bahamas, off the coast of Florida, give or take. And I did find out later, I didn't know this before, but I did find out later that there is a U.S. naval base there. It's called AUTEC. It's spelled A-U-T-E-C. I forget what it stands for. But they do naval training, deep sea submarine training, and research there. Okay, so it stands to reason that the environment that I witnessed in the dream, that seagoing vessel type environment, could be found in the Bahamas at that location. Okay, so the next part of the dream, the Sahara. Okay, you've got this gleaming tower coming out, and you've got a couple guys just hanging on for dear life. Now, when I got up in the morning, the next thing, I kept pondering this tower, and I'm like, what does this mean? And I knew that there was language in the Bible about a strong tower, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was, so I went and looked. And I found one of the Psalms where it talks about the name of Yahweh, or in your English Bibles it'll say the name of the Lord, is a strong tower. The righteous run and cling to it, or the righteous run to it. There's different ways of saying it depending on translation. So to me, made that connection. Okay, these two men on the tower, because I interpret things from a biblical lens. If this was a prophetic dream, then it stands to reason that the Bible should aid in that interpretation. So that's how I interpret the tower. The tower I interpret to be the name of Yahweh, the reputation of Yahweh, if you will, and even specifically his actual name, because we know he told Moses at the burning bush that the name of Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, is going to be his memorial name through all generations. It's important to him. Okay, so these two guys are clinging to Yahweh basically, and they're going through this desert and they end up in Egypt. Now that's just kind of a really basic nuts and bolts explanation, but let's unpack that even farther. When I looked at a map the next morning to try to figure out the connection between the Bahamas and Egypt, I started off in the Bahamas and I went to Egypt. And I noticed that if I start in the Bahamas and I go straight east, just due east, I end up in Egypt. Okay, of course I have to cross the Atlantic Ocean and then the Sahara Desert to get there, but I end up in Egypt. Okay, and so to me that made a lot of sense. And so I'm interpreting this dream as having to do with the second or greater Exodus. Now, if you're not familiar with that concept, it's going to be a while. I've had it in the works for a while, but I'm going to put out a multi-part teaching where I go into every single scripture that sets up that concept of a second greater Exodus for Yahweh's people. Okay, if you're not at all familiar with that concept, I point you towards Jeremiah 16, Isaiah 11, Ezekiel 20. Those come to mind. Hosea 11. There's lots of stuff in the prophets that talk about in the end days, at the end of the age, Yahweh gathering his people from their dispersion, from scattering them all around, and he's going to bring them back together into the land in the last days. Now I realize that concept is foreign to Christianity, but it is a very biblically sound concept. Okay, so I believe that what this is saying, as crazy as this sounds, is that there's going to be some type of a remnant of people in the Bahamas. I don't know how they get there. I don't know what the mechanism is for that. Apparently, they're at some type of a military, naval type installation. Maybe it's civilian. I don't really know for sure. But somehow they end up there. And the fact that there were two men in that location in the Bahamas, there were two men on the tower. In the dream, I could not tell if they were the same two men or not. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I just didn't get a close enough view of the two men on the tower. But they could have been. Okay, either way, you had two men. So you've got this small remnant that I think will end up in the Bahamas somehow if this dream is prophetic. And again, a big if there. I'm not saying for sure because I don't have a thus says Yahweh on this. Okay, I don't have an angel coming to me or Yahweh directly or anything like that. I can't say that. This is just a dream I had. But if it is prophetic, I think you're going to have a small remnant that end up in the Bahamas somehow. Maybe it's akin to Goshen when the Israelites were in Goshen prior to the first Exodus. You know, where they have this safe place where they're gathered. Some of the bad stuff in the plagues happened to them, but then after a while, Yahweh dealt exclusively against the Egyptians, and he protected and sheltered the Israelites. And the two men in this naval vessel were protected from harm. They were protected from what I presumed, and the other guy apparently thought along with me that this was going to be an acid bath kind of thing. It was water. The lion didn't attack the other guy, even though he easily could have. So I think that that's what's going to happen there. And so this dream sets up a trip from the Bahamas across the Atlantic, across the Sahara Desert, and into Egypt. Okay? Now, I realize that sounds insane, right? But picture yourself during the first Exodus. You're leaving Egypt, you come up to the Red Sea, the Yam Suf, okay, the Sea of Reeds, and the Egyptian army is breathing down your neck, and Moses says, "Let's go." Would you have thought that was crazy and insane? Absolutely. I would have too. Okay? So the hand of Yahweh is not too short. If Yahweh wants his people to cross the Atlantic Ocean, he will make a way. Maybe they walk on water. Maybe they walk across on the surface somehow. Maybe he parts it somehow to where they walk across on the bottom. Now to do that one, it's much more of a task because he's got to even out the seabed where they can, you know, because you've got the massive drop off at the continental shelf, and then you've got the mid-Atlantic ridge. You know, you'd have to go past all of that. So he would have to like level the surface of the seafloor, which he could do if he chose to, or have his people walk across. Either way, he's the most powerful being in the entire universe. He created it all. If he wants to do that, so be it. Okay, I'm not going to put it past him. The people end up in Africa, and then he leads them across the Sahara Desert, okay, into Egypt. Now, the reason why this is important is because the Egypt part is important, is because I mentioned Hosea 11. It talks about Ephraim returning trembling from the west. Okay, Ephraim is it's a way of saying the northern tribes. Okay, after Solomon died, if you know your biblical history, you'll know that the kingdom of Israel split in two. His son Rehoboam took the southern kingdom of Judah, centered around Jerusalem, with two tribes. The remaining 10 tribes went north with Jeroboam, and they established the kingdom of Israel. Okay, and so that's synonymous with Ephraim. It's synonymous with the name Joseph, Shechem, different things like this that indicate that northern territory. Okay, they were taken captive by the Assyrians and spread out throughout the known land at the time. That's the Assyrians had that policy. And, you know, just geographically, Assyria is right south of Europe, of Turkey, of Russia. So if they go north, guess where they're going? Okay? And there is evidence that they did. And of course, they also went to the east, but a lot of them went north. Okay? So when Jesus talks about, "I only came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel," his audience would have understood that that's who he's talking about. So where did the gospel message go? Did it immediately go to China? Did it go to Africa? A little bit, yeah. But it predominantly went up into Europe by way of Paul and the other apostles. Okay? Most Christian nations came out of Europe. You know, the European nations that was a stronghold of Christianity. The Commonwealth, you know, the colonies and things as well. America, South America, you know, Australia. Those are Christian nations, or at least they used to be. Okay, it's debatable on if they are now. But in either case, those are House of Israel nations. Those are northern tribe nations, at least on some level. All right? So if that's the case, Ephraim coming from the west, if you start in Israel, because that's where they're going, if they're coming from the west, you got the Mediterranean Sea, you got North Africa, you could make the case for Southern Europe, and then if you keep going west, you hit North America. So they're coming from those places. So it makes sense that if they're coming from the west, if they're coming through Africa, they're going to have to go through the Sahara. They're going to end up in Egypt. Then they're going to have to cross the Nile. And there's a spot in the book of Isaiah where he actually talks about walking over that dry shod. Okay? And in Isaiah 11, it names all these nations that they're going to be coming from. You know, Cush, I forget all the Lud, all the rest of them. But if you look at these nations, if you go back and look at a map, they are all adjacent to the land of Israel. So you have people being gathered in from around the world, not just America, but around the world. And they're coming by land into the promised land. Okay? So the people coming through Africa, presumably after they cross the Atlantic, are going to end up in Egypt, and then they'll have to cross the Nile, and then they'll end up going up into the promised land. Okay? Now, how everybody else gets there, I don't know. But this dream specifically, to me, indicates a group of people, probably a smaller remnant, just based on the fact that there were only 2 guys that I saw, leaving from the Bahamas, crossing the Atlantic somehow, crossing the Sahara somehow, ending up in Egypt, presumably in preparation to go to the Promised Land. Okay? So that's my interpretation of this dream. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to comment. I'll do my best to answer them. If you go through my back catalog on teachings, I do have I reference the second Exodus periodically in those teachings because it's a foundational thing when you properly interpret the end times. Okay, Christianity likes to think that there's going to be some type of a rapture to heaven before the Great Tribulation. There's really no proof for that. You know, you have to take things in 1 Thessalonians. You have to take things in 1 Corinthians 15, I think it is, that Paul said, and you have to tweak the timing to make it come, you know, before the Great Tribulation, even though the language clearly points it after. Okay? So I don't believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, but I do believe in a pre-tribulation or maybe during tribulation greater second Exodus. And like I said earlier, just to get you started, whet your appetite, so you can see that I'm not crazy, it is in your Bible. Isaiah 11, Exodus 20, Jeremiah 16, those come to mind. Those are the easiest ones to get your brain around. Hosea talks about it at length, especially in 11. And there's lots of other stuff, okay? So if this is something that resonates with you, look, you don't have to believe it, okay? It either happens or it doesn't. But if this is something that resonates with you, just this idea, like I said, I am putting together at some point, it'll probably be after the Feast of Tabernacles, an actual long-form teaching where I will go in and I will get into those scriptures I mentioned, but I'm also going to go all the way back into the book of Genesis, and I'm going to go to Revelation, and I'm going to pull out all the material that I can possibly find to make a bulletproof case for a greater or second Exodus in the last days. So if that's something that interests you, maybe like this video, subscribe to the channel, do the notifications, all that thing. I feel like I'm shilling or something to even say that kind of stuff because that's not why I have this channel. But at least that way, when the videos eventually do go up, you'll know that they're there, and you don't have to keep checking, you know, all the time, because I don't know when it will happen. It'll probably be October, late October at the very earliest. I will say that, but beyond that, I have no idea. So anyway, if you've hung with me this far, I appreciate your time. Give it some consideration before you just write it off. Read those scriptures that I mentioned. You know, dig in. There's lots of stuff about the ingathering. Deuteronomy 30 talks about it. There's lots of stuff there, guys. And do your homework. Pray about it. If you think that this is something that even has the remotest possibility of being something on the table for the future, feel free to share it, because There might be somebody else out there that needs this type of information. Okay. So I'll leave it at that. I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you for watching. Again, this is September 22nd when I'm recording this, and it should go up later today. And it's based on a dream that I had in 2018. So far, as far as I know, nothing in that dream has come to pass. So if it does happen, we'll know for sure it was prophetic. Up until that point, I'm going to say possibly. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.